Good morning, everybody. We are so back. We're finally back, I should say, after a bit of a hiatus here in the Digital Weather Center. But this is News 6 meteorologist David Nazario back with you at the helm. And we're not talking about anything too eventful, to tell you the truth, besides the heat. The heat is coming full swing here in Central Florida, and it is expected to stay that way for a considerable amount of time, especially as we tread together through the new month of February. So, good morning to everybody out there. Thank you so much for tuning in with us finally once again on News 6 Plus and on the News 6 YouTube channel. This week, we're going to try to hammer out consecutive streams, even though we really don't have any breaking headlines to discuss in the weather sphere department. But we're going to go ahead and talk anyways because it's time we get this show back on the road. It has been a hot minute. And to tell you the truth, speaking of hot, as a matter of fact, no pun intended, this is what I got for you. This is the next big thing. Hot, or I should say heat. Maybe not so much hot. We're not looking at, summer-like temperatures or anything like that, but we're definitely going to be above average and stay above average for the foreseeable future with as far out as we can track comfortably for all of you out there watching. So let's take a look at some of the headlines here as we get started. So, you probably notice outside, even right now, as late as it is already in the day, we're only 30 minutes left of our Monday morning. It is 11:30 sharp. We still have fog sticking around with very warm afternoons ahead. Excuse me, I'm running a little low on caffeine today. It has definitely been a morning. And then as we move through Hump Day on Wednesday and get later into the week, we should start to see the fog clearing out thanks to a stationary boundary that is sitting overhead, adding to the moisture and the stability that we have in place. High pressure is going to rebuild in around that feature, washing the front out and hopefully increasing how much stability and sinking motions we have in the atmosphere, while also driving up a bit of the winds. And as a result, the fog should start to become less and less as we go through Wednesday morning and then through to the end of the first full week of February. And then by the weekend, believe it or not, we will still be warming. Mid 80s are possible into next week. I'm not even joking. I was looking earlier at some of the 7 to 10 day forecast data. And believe it or not, for some of us, especially in Polk, Orange, Osceola County, maybe into southern central Brevard County, some of our models are hinting at 85 degrees, 86 degrees with that 100% humidity in place as well. So if you go over to clickorlando.com, I wrote I think a kind of a punny article. I've been on a roll with those lately, saying, is Punxsutawney Phil punking Central Floridians? Because we saw the shadow yesterday on Groundhog Day. He saw a shadow, I should say. By the way, a big congrats to Phil. I read an article out there saying that supposedly this is his first Groundhog Day as a father, so that's kind of exciting. But he saw his shadow, which would technically mean he is predicting an extension to our winter season, regardless of if we hit the point in the calendar to where we transition to spring or not. They're thinking, he himself are believing that we're going to have another 6 additional weeks of winter time. And here in Florida, doesn't quite look like it. In fact, we haven't felt like winter since about 8 days ago. We had a huge transition in our pattern where Saturday, the final Saturday of January, I believe it was the 25th, we woke up in the 30s, and then we ended the weekend in the mid-70s. And then from there, it's just been kind of warm. And that's going to be the song and dance for a little while now. Let's come on over to the water vapor, and I'll paint the picture for you. It looks like my old illustrations are still there. Let me take you full screen, and we'll do some doodling. The primary contributor to the fact that we don't have any type of cold air coming down is the fact that our jet is moving west to east. We are under zonal flow, which is usually the state that the jet stream wants to remain in. Everything in weather, believe it or not, and this is also something I put in an article on clickorlando.com, I want to say a little over a week ago. Anytime you experience weather phenomena, and I personally think this is really cool. You out there can be the judge as well. I'm also a big weather nerd. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you all. But hear me out. I learned very early in my weather career as an Air Force weather forecaster that the only reason, obviously there's a bunch of other variables, but the sole purpose and reason we get weather phenomena, hurricanes, winter storms, blizzards, supercells, you name it, all the crazy weather out there that would normally be detrimental to us and our way of living, is because the atmosphere just cannot come to a state of equilibrium, a state of rest. It can't do it because we have all the different intricate variables like the tilt of the Earth, the orbit around the sun, the angulation of the sun's rays hitting a certain portion of the Earth, whether it be the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, depending on your time of year, the ocean temperatures creating our hurricanes, the direction that they go also being driven by unequal heating of the Earth's surface, whether it be a water or a land feature. All of it has to do with the fact that the Earth just can't get it together. There is absolutely no way for the planet on a global scale to find a state of rest thermodynamically. And as a result, that's why we get such weird, I was going to say winter weather, but that's why we get weird weather regardless. So every time you see a hurricane out there, it is a natural process of the Earth trying to redistribute all that heat and put it somewhere else to try to balance it out. Every time we get a winter storm, it's because we have hot butting up against cold. It's uneven. It's imbalanced. That's where the word instability comes from. It's unstable. And in this case, the jet over the United States, that is actually fairly stable. It's flowing west to east. And as a result, being on the south side of the jet, that is why we were warmed up. And truthfully, looking long range out down the road, 2-3 weeks even, both Climate Prediction Center and us here in the Pinpoint Weather Center are thinking that we are not going to see any very aggressive dips in the jet stream for a pretty decent amount of time. And when I say decent, I mean we're talking possibly even upwards of 30 days. If you look at the Climate Prediction Center outlook here for the next 30 days, the whole month of February and some change in there, we're thinking above average temperatures for not only us here in Central Florida, but for much of the South, the Deep South, getting into the Mid-Atlantic states, up through the Carolinas, Virginia, trying to squeak its way up into the Midwest there. It's behind the banner, but you can see that Illinois, parts of Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and further up the eastern seaboard are underneath those orange shades, indicating we could be above average for the time of year. And that's because we don't have any aggressive systems trying to marinate or trying to manifest themselves within the upper air pattern. And I can show you that here momentarily. But first, let's take a quick look at the radar outside right now. Nothing going on. We are very quiet. In fact, I'll go ahead and take us full screen to show you that even the radar does a fantastic job of showing us that west to east flow. Because if I zoom us out to a national perspective, look at that. Across the central and southern halves of the United States, there's pretty much nothing going on. We have some of that atmospheric river enhancement for Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, bleeding through the Snake River Valley of southern Idaho. But then notice how even the current snowfall out there works its way due west to east. It just goes to show the nature of our upper level pattern, whether it be just atmospheric heights, where the warmth is versus the cold, or the jet stream, the polar front jet itself. Now, I know there's some folks out there in all of their infinite weenieism, as I like to call it, on TikTok, on Instagram, saying, be prepared because we're expecting another Arctic blast to cover most of the United States. You know, there's some truth to that, but there's a lot of unrealism to it as well. It's unrealistic to say another Arctic invasion. I'm personally not seeing it, and I can show you right now. I'll go ahead and back up my bold statements. So here is our jet stream. This is live for right now, and you can see that west to east flow, due west to east, as a matter of fact, the jet entering the United States over California, the Pacific Northwest, and then working due east through the northern central plains, the Great Lakes, and then exiting right off into the Atlantic Ocean, pretty much at the same latitudinal line with which it came from on the west coast. So pretty neat to see that all taking shape. And if I go through time and I start to fast forward, notice, yeah, we get a little bit of a trough ejection, but again, notice where it is. It's not really digging south. It's right here over the Pac Northwest, and as you can see with the jet out ahead of it, notice the colors here. There's our jet max, where the strongest winds embedded within the storm system are. It's going to follow that same kind of zonal flow. And I haven't looked at this model, so we'll see. If it goes south, then you can call me out on this. Or light me up in the comments. But watch, as this continues to move forward in time, see that? Moves due east to west. Doesn't really make it that far to the south. And then we get another extension of a trough as we go down through Monday the 10th, so 7 days from now. Let me clear my pen doodling out of the way so I can ungarble the page here. And you go further in time, and even that system doesn't make it out of the desert southwest. Look at how all that troughing just kind of stays out there. We get weak little shortwave appendages, is what I'll call them, that work their way into the pattern, but overall, our long wave feature stays over the Rockies. And that's why, if I were to take you to a national perspective of what Climate Prediction Center is thinking, we're going to be under what's called a negative PNA. Pacific North Atlantic or North American Oscillation, where you have a trough out west and a big old ridge out over the east. Some insight: the PNA, the NAO, the AO, all these random acronyms that you may hear myself and other pinpoint meteorologists, especially like Jonathan Kagis, mentioning on streams like this, these are very important. To give you a little insight, PNA is what saved us from Raphael and Sarah last hurricane season. If it weren't for that negative PNA building a ridge in, and you could technically say the PNA is what saved us from Beryl very early in the hurricane season. We had an abnormally strong PNA building in with an anomalous ridge over the Bahamas, Florida, the southeast United States, and that's what kept Beryl pummeling its way off towards the west through the Yucatan and then eventually, unfortunately, into Texas. That could have been our storm. Raphael and Sarah were supposed to be our storms, but we had another strong, dominant, negative Pacific North Atlantic or North America. I keep saying Atlantic. North American Oscillation build in. And that's what we have here. You can see, I'll clear the illustration one more time so I can draw it in. You can see big old trough, albeit kind of ragged with how much split jet flow we have over the heart of the nation. But then here's that ridge dominating over the southeast and over the western Atlantic. That is your negative PNA. And down the road, we do try to transition a bit, just a bit, to a positive, which does suggest we could get some cold air leakage, is what I'll call it, over the eastern half of the country. But for us here in Florida, for all intents and purposes, we are looking at 60s and 70s after the cold air does try to spill down this far south. So even then, could you make a case that it's still kind of wintry-esque out there? I mean, yeah, if you want to look at it that way. I personally think that sounds fantastic. Upper 60s, low 70s for the foreseeable future. I was done with the rain, done with that annoying drizzle, done with waking up to the 20s and the 30s everywhere you were here in Central Florida. So I think February looks to be a nice reprieve from all that hellacious, wintry impacts we saw during the month of January. So don't go anywhere, folks. We're going to take our first quick 2-minute break. And I know I say first as if we're going to have another one, but obviously this is our little interlude in the midst of our morning weather update. So especially if you're over on YouTube, please don't go anywhere. And if you have any questions, please hit me up in the comment section or in the live chat. And then over on News 6 Plus, after the 2 minutes, we'll be right back. And we're going to talk a little bit more about local weather and what we can expect as we go through the rest of the first week of February and then deeper into the heart of the Valentine's / Aquarian and so on and so forth month. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And we're back. I swear, those 2-minute intermissions feel like 2 seconds. I glance at some of the model data, I take a sip of water, and the next thing you know, we're back. Got to pay attention to that 2-minute counter. Just imagine when you're in there in the boxing ring, when you have a minute between 3-minute rounds, it probably feels like you sit down, take a deep breath, and then you're back out there swinging. So we're going to transition now to talking a bit of the future cast, looking at what the rest of the week ahead has in store for us, and what I meant by some cold air leakage as opposed to a full-fledged polar or Arctic outbreak for us in the south, and especially us here in the Florida Peninsula. So I'll take you full screen so we can take a glance and get into the weeds a bit using our latest European model. And right off the rip, if you notice, there is a bit of a feature right off the coastline right there, draped across not only us in central Florida, but up against the eastern seaboard. Now, what's kind of neat about this is we haven't had any major cold plunges in recent days. Everything's just more or less been kind of marinating where it is. And so what's happening here is we have a bit of not only cold air trying to come off of the United States, but we also have the Gulf Stream down here right off the immediate coast. I'll use a zigzag line so I don't get lost in the sauce here, drawing a whole bunch of different doodles here. And then our high pressures off the coast. And so this here is actually both an influence of a what's called synoptic scale front, which is a bona fide cold front, which is what we would typically see coming off the United States in association with our jet stream. But it's also identifying the temperature discontinuity between the Atlantic Ocean, the warmer points of the Gulf Stream waters, and then the colder temperatures over the actual terrain of the east coast of the United States. So I kind of find that really neat. And that's also what has been the deciding factor in the key ingredient for why we've woken up with such intense radiational fog here in central Florida. This morning, no kidding, I was probably down to visibility way underneath 1/8, 1/10 of a mile down in my area of Polk County. I had to have everything on and take my time, especially down some of the poorly lit back roads. Could honestly see some kind of monsters in the mist if you guys are a Stephen King or a John Carpenter fan sneaking up on you in a situation like that. Thankfully, it has started to lift. It's transitioned to more of stratus, but it does look like it's going to roll back in tonight as we get the remnants of that stationary tail to slowly but surely mix out as that high pressure begins to take hold. And I'll show you that right now. Let's go ahead and get me out of the picture. We'll go full screen once again, and I'll take you through the next couple of days. So you see, as we go through very early morning Tuesday, we still have a bit of that frontal boundary in place. There's the tail of it. You can kind of see a bit of it in the precip field off our east coast, right back down, snaking its way through the greater Orlando, Tampa Bay area, where the temperatures kind of get garbled. If you look, we have spreading of the air down through here. We have cooler air trying to still sink its way through the Big Bend area of Florida, down into the eastern Gulf, and then we have high pressure building in even further off towards the east that's going to help to wash that front out altogether. And then by Wednesday, fog should not be nearly as much of an issue. If you notice, we finally fully transitioned back to what's called return flow. Now our high pressure is front and center off the Myrtle Beach coast, off of South and North Carolina, and we have prevailing winds out of the east across the Florida Peninsula. So not saying we can't get some fog out there, because we will still be fairly stable and very moist as a result of that high pressure. But now, as you can see, we have an open Gulf. So all that air from across the Atlantic, the Florida Straits, the Caribbean, the Gulf itself, everywhere you name it to our south of us here in Central Florida is just moving towards the west and then back up towards the north and northwest over the Great Plains. This would traditionally be a severe weather recipe. And as you can see, the model as of Wednesday morning, you can kind of see the initial phases of something trying to develop out there over the plains. But because we are still under that fairly zonal jet flow, look at how it immediately rockets off towards the east, and we get nothing down here in Florida. In fact, you can see some cold air trying to make its way through the plains, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Kansas. But if I go even further than that, look at that. Does absolutely nothing to make its way down here. If you look, we are still under that return flow down here. High pressure is still kicking strong, dominating the weather pattern down in the southeast, and as a result, we can no longer see where that front is. It's probably somewhere back up in through there. We have the cold air moving almost eastward as opposed to southeastward, with tremendous amounts of warmth and moist air still surging up through the Gulf, through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and then, of course, us here in Florida. And being beneath that high pressure ridge, that's why our temperatures are really not going to change. The high, especially in the southwest Atlantic, acts to really stir the pot. It takes the warmth on its south side and stirs it up and around to the north. And that's how everybody gets in on that return flow. But in our case, since we're sandwiched right underneath it, we're not really going to have a discernible wind direction. It's going to be very variable for us for across Central Florida, and I'll show you the winds in a second. So we're just going to stay warm. We're going to stay muggy. We're going to stay somewhat cloudy because we're stuck right under the apex of that surface high pressure and the upper level ridging that's also driving our warmth. The wind model here does a fantastic job of showing that as well. If we go through Monday and then into Tuesday, notice our winds stay very light. Very light. But then off the East Coast, you can see just underneath where my pinpoint accurate banner is, all those strong winds. That's what's helping to also pull the leftovers of that stationary boundary, that stationary tail that's upping our fog chances during the overnight hours and early morning hours before sunrise up and out. And I want you to watch what happens very closely over Florida, okay? Because see how we have northerlies up until about Orlando, and then we have southerlies through Miami up until about Polk and Osceola? That would be that stationary tail right there. Watch how that goes away if I forward the clock just a little bit more. Bam. Gone. By Wednesday morning, we are all out of the east. It's going to flush our system out for all intents and purposes, and notice how the winds pick up as a result. This is Wednesday at 9 a.m., 10-mile-an-hour gusts, 5 gusts and 13 gusts in Miami. I know I read that very weird, sound like an amateur there, but just trying to get the communication of the picture across to you as we go forward in time. And then watch as we go through Wednesday during the day, winds continue to pick up. There's that signal of the return flow kicking strong through Dallas, Little Rock, up through Nashville, those shades of yellow and orange finally starting to take shape. And then notice our winds here in Florida, and this is why the fog is not going to be as much of an issue going forward. If you notice, even overnight on Thursday, we're still gusting anywhere between 10 to 15 miles an hour in Central Florida as a result of that higher pressure. Then by Friday, our winds start to taper just a little bit as we sit right underneath that high pressure. And again, this wind model does a fantastic job of showing that. You can see the clockwise rotation right in through there. Our winds are very light and variable because we are now parked right beneath that surface high pressure. We have southerlies to our west, and then kind of a mix of northerlies / southerlies as a result of that winter storm that goes west to east to our north, but none of that cold air makes it down to our neighborhood. And this is going to be a repetitive cycle as we go through the next several days and possibly the next week or two. Even the national wind chills, the feel-like temperatures show that zonal flow. You can draw a line pretty much west to east from San Francisco all the way to Washington, D.C. I know you see the shades of blue out there through parts of Utah, Colorado, Nevada. You got to remember, those are the Rockies. So what the model is showing you is you're high up in elevation. Naturally, it'll be colder, but if you had a uniform surface from San Francisco through to Washington, D.C., there really is no change in our temperature. The gradient is west to east. It's very smooth. And as a result, because of that, you can see our forecast highs for today and tomorrow getting into the low, squeaking towards those mid-80s for parts of Kissimmee and Lakeland. You can see we're still warming down there. Same with Orlando, Leesburg. You can see pretty much everybody across the board is going to continue to warm up. Look at Palm Coast and Daytona Beach. Today, a forecast high of 71, maybe 72, and then by tomorrow, 77, 76. So we're very quickly continuing to warm as that high pressure builds in and continues to nudge all that warmth into our Central Florida viewing area. So what can we expect the rest of this week? Well, I mean, kind of the same repetition or the rhythm we followed for the last 5 to 7 days prior. Mornings start with dense fog, above average temps. Temps not looking to drop anytime soon, and we're getting even warmer as time continues to go on. And then last but certainly not least, before I take any questions that there may be in the chat, here's a look at your pinpoint accurate forecast for the next 7 days. Notice if you work from west to east on the chart, just like that zonal flow, we start out at 80 even for the greater Orlando area. And then by Sunday, we're up to 84. And next week looks to hold that tempo with possibly trying to see a couple of 85, 86 degree marks popping up for our northern and southern and eastern counties. So that's all I got. Folks, thank you so much for taking some time out of your Monday morning. I hope you had a spectacular weekend, a solid end to your January. We're already in the second month of 2025, which, because I'm going to be doing an update again very soon on my personal YouTube and probably writing a Click-O article for you all to digest, we are now counting down to some of our early preseason hurricane season forecasts. We usually start to see them rolling out by late March, early April, as we get into the full-fledged severe weather season and spring season. And I will also be doing a couple of updates on my personal social media and YouTube channel, talking the latest climatology data, and then rolling out some of the generalized facts of what we are looking at for this upcoming hurricane season. So far, night and day difference between what 2024 had for us, what 2025 is looking like. A very different pattern out there, despite the Enzo still kind of hanging out in that neutral territory. We're in La Nina now, but we're expected to bounce back out of that here very soon as we go through February and through to April. So more on that to come. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I will go ahead and bid you a fond farewell until this time again tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday, a solid start to the first full week of February, and I hope you're enjoying these warmer temperatures because they are sticking around. And if they decide to switch up, if Mother Nature throws a curve at us, you know exactly where to come find the latest information here at your Pinpoint Weather Center at News 6. So until next time, folks, this is the Digital Weather Center signing out.